Welcome to another edition of Great Health, Abundant Happiness, and Outrageous Love. Come on. We wanted to talk a little bit, expanding upon last night. We were talking about reality transurfing and putting importance in a relationship. And it's interesting because we got yet another call from a very dear friend saying, hey, just wanted to let you know I'm getting a divorce. And this was over 30 years of marriage. And we've had a few of these close ones, right?
We have. And on top of that, throughout the years, so many of our great friends have parted ways. We've had 3 couples in the past 2 weeks reach out to let us know that their relationships were ending.
Yeah.
And it's always really sad to us because, you know, if you find that person, and it's so magical to find that person, and so often we forget why we fell in love with that person, right?
I guess so. I mean, that's what happens. You know, so we wanted to talk a little bit about how you maintain that relationship.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, that is so mission critical. Going back to the reality transurfing, you have selected that slide of this till death do us part, or everlasting love. In our case, outrageous everlasting love. And we have already seen so many of the slides of our own relationship, right? From, we'll be 29 years next month. So from the beginning, when we started, we could see 5 years out. We could see the slide from 10 years out, 20 years out, 30 years out. And Jeff and I have always talked about the fact that we are going to be live to be 100 plus, and how we really plan to die together in our hundreds, minutes or very close in time apart, right?
Well, the commitment I made to Karen was that I'd be there at your deathbed, even if you dumped me.
He
Right?
did, and of course
Right.
that would never happen, and he knows that.
Well, I think you bring up a good point. So the advice we'd like to give is, always remember why you came together in the first place. So as Karen just stated, when you pick that track, that life track that had that significant other with you till the end, all of those slides or frames in between are pieces that you just said, 5 years out,
Right.
10 years out, 15 years out. You can take any of those and focus on it. So as you're going down the path, you've got to remember each one of those slides or frames as you move along in life, and don't forget why you came together in the first place. I mean, there was a reason, right?
Right. Exactly. And I think what happens sometimes, and this is a big part of what we talked about yesterday, is that the relationship must be nurtured in order for it to be maintained and to grow, right? You don't want to just maintain your relationship anyway. You really want it to grow and flourish. And the only way to do that is to make it such a priority and make this person a priority. This person is your treasure, your shining star, and you must never, ever forget that. And, what happens a lot of times, people get together, they start a family, the kids become the priority. And I have always said this, and I've told this to so many people that don't always agree with me, but I will stand by it because it has really proved correct for us. When you come together in a relationship, this right here, this is the foundation for everything that comes afterwards, including your children and everything. So if this foundation is solid, it is the perfect foundation to grow upon. If the foundation isn't taken care of and it starts to form cracks, and the cracks get bigger, and sometimes I think what happens, the cracks get so bigger that everything just falls apart, right? And sometimes it just seems irreparable. And because we've not been at that situation, it's very difficult to imagine it or to really tell somebody at that point how to get it back, except to go back to the original frames. Right.
Yeah, I'd say you're right, and we haven't let it get that far. Obviously, we've had arguments in our day. In almost 30 years. Obviously, you have disagreements.
Absolutely. We're going to be married 29 years next month, and if you think that we don't ever disagree, definitely think again, because we do, right?
Right.
Much
Exactly.
less lately, though, I have to say, over the past several years, because or maybe we still do, but we accept the disagreements so much easier.
Right. Yes, exactly. You can't take the other person for granted. I guess I wanted to say.
Right.
We heard something probably a year ago about thinking about your life, and this is life beyond a relationship. But the term was "die before you die." And what that means is, when you're lying on your deathbed, so many people, go to that spot and they have regrets in life. So the whole idea about die before you die is to project yourself out there.
Right.
Project yourself out there on your deathbed and think, what are you going to be worried about? What are you thinking about?
Right.
I mean, I can tell you myself lying there, I'd be thinking, did I do enough for Karen? Did I do enough for my 2 girls? And I go out to my family and Karen's family and our friends. You just go out from the circle. So the whole idea about die before you die, start living that way today so that you don't have those regrets. So
Right.
as we were coming up with this concept after we got this call today, I said, about break up before you break up, or get divorced before you get divorced. So think about not having that other person in your life anymore. If you think that person's gone, whether they got abducted or hit by a bus or whatever it is, they're not there when you wake up in the morning, you go to get your coffee, they're not there. They're not there throughout the day. They're not there when you come home. What does that feel like? I mean,
Right.
would you really miss that person? Is there pain there? That may put a reality on this that kind of, takes you out to those major cracks in the foundation that you're talking about. You have to visualize that ahead of time. Right?
Absolutely. And again, going back to reality transurfing, those slides are out there, right? They're every slide is out there. So if you have chosen to take the till death do us part with somebody and living happily ever after, and all of a sudden you find yourself in a different slide, how did that happen? You chose that. And that is a difficult reality. It really is to admit, but all the options are there, and we have the option to choose which slide. And so sometimes you're on a certain path in a track of a slide and things change, right? The energy changes, and now all of a sudden you're in a different track. But and I do want to say that Jeffrey and I, in one of the arguments that we had years ago, and he said to me, I don't even remember what we were arguing about, and I'm sure that it was something super insignificant. I will say in our 29 years, we've never argued about money, and I highly suggest that couples leave arguing about money out of the relationship, because it is such a ridiculous thing to ever argue about. It really is.
There's a lot of things that
a lot of things are.
Everything is.
Exactly. But we never argued about money. We never worried about infidelity. I really think that all of our arguments were over small things, and that's usually the case. And often, that's why people get divorced, over silly things. I didn't like, the littlest things. And
it doesn't matter what it is. It's like
right.
You make a mountain out of a molehill.
Right.
So the story you're trying to tell
Yes.
is, and this happened multiple times, because you were probably a little feistier. You like to be mad longer, right?
Definitely.
I don't know. Is that a woman thing? I don't want to say anything sexist here.
Well,
but I think a woman.
I don't think that's a woman thing. I think that's a personality trait. And it's definitely not a woman thing. It's a personality trait, because I know a lot of couples where, it's the opposite.
Okay. So,
I have always been, in my younger days, stubborn. And it was my way or the highway. I mean, I've said that a million times. And I only saw things one way. And we all tend to see things the way that we know, right?
right.
So we had this pretty torrid argument over obviously something stupid because I couldn't tell you what it was. But it got to the point where, Jeffrey said to me, "So what? Is it over? This is it?" And I thought to myself, is it over? This is it. I mean, we're just having a fight. And I have to say, in a way, I don't want to say I felt panicked, but I thought to myself, is this how these things spiral I can't even say the word because Jeffrey and I try not to say it, but is this how things spiral to divorce? That, one person becomes so stubborn and said, yes, this is it, right?
Yeah. Well,
But instead I said, no, this isn't it. I just want to be angry for a little bit. And you said back to me.
well, I said, okay, so how long is it going to take? And then she'd get a little more infuriated until I said, okay, so let me tell you how this will go. You're going to be angry for an hour, or maybe it's 2 hours, maybe it's a day, maybe it's 3 days, whatever it is. After those 3 days pass, we're going to be all full of love again, and we're going to be all kissy, huggy, all smiles, and it's going to happen, right?
Sounded so good.
Or is this it?
Right.
And the reason why I put that out there, it's like life is short.
Mm-hmm.
Why spend the day or 3 days, or God forbid, some people do it for weeks or months, and
Right.
ignoring each other or
Why
mad.
spend a minute?
Right.
And that's really what you taught me, because my entire life up to that point, I had taken an approach of much more stubbornness, and I'm going to use the word pig-headed because I think that pretty much described how I was in certain situations.
But it's just for a short period of time. I remember your dad telling a story once where you were all upset and screaming and yelling, and you were in tears, and someone called.
One of
your friends called, and I can see your dad now telling the story. And all of a sudden you're screaming and crying. You pick the phone. Hello. Like nothing was wrong.
Right.
So
right.
So the whole.
I was 14
yes,
at that time.
but the whole thing is. It's somewhat of a facade, and I think you're right. What happens is people start, comparing this, or taking it to the next step.
Right.
Right. Okay, you're not going to do that. Well, I'm not going to do this. Then
becomes a competition.
and it just goes so far that then the cracks are too big and you can't repair them. I think that's what happens. So
Exactly.
you just have to be very careful of that. So always remember on why you got together, and through Transurface we just talked about. You pick that life track. You have all of those slides or frames
Right.
in the movie that you can pull out all the way through. If you want to follow it all the way through, you got to follow it. So
Right.
you can't take the other person for granted. Make sure you take care of each other. We've got the love book. That's a whole different video. We've talked about this, writing love notes to each other each morning. Something magical happens there where, when I get up first thing in the morning, it's 4:30, I'm making my coffee over here, and I'm writing Karen a love note. I have to think, what did I appreciate about Karen yesterday? What's the one thing I really appreciated, or multiple things?
Right.
And what am I grateful for? And I write those things down. So it does two things. One, it kind of lifts you up about the relationship. It also wipes out any concerns if you ever had some words, right?
Right. And I want to say, this is so important, is that you always have to give your 100%. It's not a 50-50. It's 100 and 100. 100 plus, 100 plus. And, don't do something to expect something. So Jeffrey wrote me a love note for every single day of our relationship for the first 10 years. 10 years. 10 times 365. That's a lot of love notes. And I never wrote him back one. And yet he always continued to write me one. Now, I'm sure there were other things that I did.
Oh, you did plenty,
that,
obviously. Yeah.
That you didn't do, but it was never a comparison. Well, I did this and you did that. But I have to say, after 10 years, it occurred to me that I bet Jeffrey would really love for me to write him a love note back. And I did, hence the love book was created. And I have to tell you, that simple note that I wrote back to him was huge. I mean, it was really a turning point, not so much because of what I said, but because I did something very small that meant a lot.
Right.
And that's really what relationships are built upon. All of the little things that we do for each other. You bring me coffee in bed every morning, you carry my skis for me, these small things, and you always thank me for things. And
don't beef it up too much, like ladies will be calling in here, like operators are standing by. No.
Call away.
Now listen, now you're...
I always say, if I could clone you, honey, I would be the most popular woman on earth, because you are an amazing, amazing partner. But with that said, you're an amazing partner for me. And everybody's wants and needs and desires are different.
That's
right?
Absolutely. By the way, you're great too. Obviously, that's why we have such a great relationship. But you were going to share a story, kind of in wrapping this up, because it's a story that I think you read it to me once before. Even though as you read it to me, we had tears in our eyes, so it's kind of a little bit of a tearjerker. But it's you looked it up. It's like a legend.
Well, it's a legend. So this story, which many of you have probably heard before, when I did some research on it, it has actually evolved from many lands ago, and the names have all changed, and the ending of the story has changed. But the way that the most recent story reads, I just think is so poignant, and it really puts into perspective what's important, and to forget about the petty stuff. Take a look at that person that you fell in love with. Really, really look at them and remind yourself of all of the beautiful things about them that, initially attracted you to them. And again, that's all the law of attraction. Whatever you're putting out to them is what you're getting back. So you have the opportunity to change that.
Right.
So I have to read this story, and I wish that I had it memorized, but I'm going to read it. And I'm going to try not to cry. But it reminded me that when you do get the rare gift of true love, to never, ever let that go. Don't take it for granted. So the story goes, this man, when he got home that night, as his wife served dinner, I held her hand and said, "I've got something to tell you." She sat down and ate quietly. Again, I observed the hurt in her eyes. Suddenly, I didn't know how to open my mouth, but I had to let her know what I was thinking. I wanted divorce. I raised the topic calmly. She didn't seem to be annoyed by my words. Instead, she asked me softly, "Why?" I avoided her question. This made her angry. She threw away the fork she was using and shouted at me, "You are not a man." That night, we didn't talk to each other. She was weeping. I knew she wanted to find out what had happened to our marriage. But I could hardly give her a satisfactory answer. She had lost my heart to Jane. I didn't love her anymore. I just pitied her. With a deep sense of guilt, I drafted a divorce agreement which stated that she could own our house, our car, and 30% stake of my company. She glanced at it and then tore it into pieces. The woman who had spent 10 years of her life with me had become a stranger. I felt sorry for her wasted time, resources, and energy, but I could not take back what I had said for her, for I loved Jane so dearly now. Finally, she cried loudly in front of me, which was what I expected to see. To me, her cry was actually a kind of a release. The idea of divorce, which I had obsessed over for several weeks, seemed to be firmer and clearer now. The next day, I came back home very late and found her writing something at the table. I didn't have supper, but went straight to sleep and fell asleep very fast because I was tired after an eventful day with Jane. When I woke up, she was still there at the table writing. I just didn't care, so I turned over and went to sleep again. In the morning, she presented her divorce conditions. She didn't want anything from me, but needed a month's notice before the divorce. She requested that in the 1 month we both struggle to live as normal a life as possible. Her reasons were simple. Our son had his exams in a month's time, and she didn't want to disrupt him with our broken marriage. This was agreeable to me, but she had something more. She asked me to recall how I carried her into our bridal room on our wedding day. She requested that every day for the month's duration, I carry her out of our bedroom to the front door every morning. I thought she was going crazy. Just to make our days last together bearable, I accepted her odd request. I told Jane about my wife's divorce conditions. Jane laughed loudly and thought it was absurd. No matter what trick she applies, she has to face the divorce, she said scornfully. My wife and I hadn't had any body contact since my divorce intention was explicitly expressed. So when I carried her out on the first day, we both appeared clumsy. Our son clapped behind us. Daddy is holding Mommy in his arms. His words brought me a sense of pain. From the bedroom to the sitting room, then to the door, I walked over 30 feet with her in my arms. She closed her eyes and said softly, "Don't tell our son about the divorce." I nodded, feeling somewhat upset. I put her down outside the door. She went to wait for the bus to work. I drove alone to the office. On the second day, we were more at ease. She leaned on my chest. I could smell the fragrance of her blouse. I realized that I hadn't looked at this woman carefully for a long time. I realized she was not young anymore. There were fine wrinkles on her face and her hair was graying. Our marriage had taken its toll on her. For a minute, I wondered what I had done to her. On the fourth day, when I lifted her up, I felt a sense of intimacy returning. This was the woman who had given 10 years of her life to me. On the fifth and sixth day, I realized that our sense of intimacy was growing again. I didn't tell Jane about this. It became easier to carry her as the months slipped by. Perhaps the everyday workout made me stronger. She was choosing what to wear one morning. She tried on quite a few dresses. Suddenly it hit me. She had buried so much pain and bitterness in her heart. Subconsciously, I reached out and touched her head. Our son came in at that moment and said, "Dad, it's time to carry Mom out." To him, seeing his father carrying his mother out had become an essential part of his life. My wife gestured to our son to come closer and hugged him tightly. I turned my face away because I was afraid I might change my mind at this last minute. I then held her in my arms, walking from the bedroom through the sitting room to the hallway. Her hands surrounded my neck softly and naturally. I held her body tightly. It was just like our wedding day. But her much lighter weight made me sad. On the last day, when I held her in my arms, I could hardly move a step. Our son had gone to school. I held her tightly and said, I hadn't noticed that our life lacked intimacy. I drove to the office, jumped out of the car swiftly without locking the door. I was afraid I would delay, and I was afraid any delay would make me change my mind. I walked upstairs. Jane opened the door, and I said to her, "Sorry, Jane, I don't want a divorce anymore." She looked at me astonished and then touched my forehead. "Do you have a fever?" she said. I moved her hand off my head. "Sorry, Jane," I said. "I won't divorce my wife. My marriage life was probably boring because she and I didn't value the details of our lives, not because we didn't love each other anymore. Now I realize that since I carried her into my home on our wedding day, I'm supposed to hold her until death do us part." Jane seemed to suddenly wake up. She gave me a loud slap and slammed the door and burst into tears. I walked downstairs and drove away. At the floral shop on the way, I ordered a bouquet of flowers for my wife. The salesgirl asked me what to write on the card. I smiled and wrote, "I'll carry you out every morning until death do us part." That evening I arrived home, flowers in my hands, a smile on my face. I ran upstairs only to find my wife in the bed, dead. My wife had been fighting cancer for months, and I was too busy with Jane to even notice.
Sad.
It's such a sad story, and it really brings to the forefront, if you are lucky enough to find that beautiful gift in another person, don't waste it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a interesting story, but it goes along with what I was saying about the die before you die, or
Absolutely.
break up before you break up, or divorce before you divorce. If you're having issues, think about what would it be like if that person were no longer there. You might say, hey, that's great, and then maybe you need to move on and do something else. But if you really do care, like this story suggests, you people just kind of drift apart for no reason at all.
Right.
If you really do care, you should figure it out ahead of time, obviously.
Exactly. People drift apart because of the ordinariness or mundaneness of life. And guess what? There's so much to be grateful for in those mundane moments. And don't ever forget that.
Right.
I treasure you, Jeffrey.
I treasure you, my love.
Wishing you great health, abundant happiness, and outrageous love from the nest at Copper Mountain.
Click off and subscribe, please, guys. We'd love to have you on board. Thanks.